So, a prayer before a town meeting, is that just a harmless nod to tradition, or is it a major violation of a core American principle? Well, that exact question went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it really pitted this idea of history against our modern diverse society. Today, we're going to break down exactly what they decided. Yeah, really think about it for a second. Imagine you're at your local town hall, right? You're there to argue for a new stop sign or debate some zoning issue, and before any of that business gets started, the person leading the meeting asks everyone to bow their heads in prayer. Is that okay? Is it just a harmless tradition, or does it cross some kind of fundamental line? All right, so let's get into it. And this isn't just some abstract theoretical debate. To really get to the heart of it, we have to go to the actual town where this whole legal battle kicked off. So we're headed to the town of Greece, which is a suburb of Rochester in upstate New York. And it was their practice, a really long-standing one, of starting town board meetings with a prayer that ended up sparking this huge legal fight, one that, went all the way to the top. So what's the story here? Well, the town of Greece started its monthly board meetings with a prayer, an invocation. But here's the thing, for almost a decade, from 1999 to 2007, every single person invited to give that prayer was a Christian cleric. Every single one. And two local citizens, Susan Galloway and Linda Stevens, they attended these meetings. They argued, hey, this practice makes us feel like outsiders in our own government. They said it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, the part that says the government can't just set up an official religion. Okay, so how did the town defend this? And maybe more importantly, how did the Supreme Court's majority end up defending it? Well, they leaned really, really heavily on one big idea: history. Justice Anthony Kennedy, who wrote the majority opinion, he didn't see this as some radical new endorsement of religion at all. Instead, he framed it as something that's been woven into the very fabric of American government since the founding. It's a tradition, he said, of what's called legislative prayer. And look, the court wasn't just starting from scratch here. They had a major precedent, a previous case to lean on. All the way back in 1983, in a case called Marsh v. Chambers, they had already ruled that opening a state legislature with a prayer was totally constitutional. They saw it as a tradition that was compatible with our founding principles. In this quote right here from Justice Kennedy, it really gets to the absolute core of their argument. He's basically saying that history itself gives us the answer. I mean, think about his logic. If the very same Congress that wrote the First Amendment also went and hired a chaplain to pray, well, how on earth could the practice be unconstitutional? That was his point. So a really crucial point here is a distinction the majority made. They argued that these prayers, they're mainly for the lawmakers themselves, for the town board members. They're meant to, lend a little gravity to what they're doing. And as for the regular citizens in the audience, well, they said just feeling offended or a little uncomfortable is not the same thing as being legally forced or coerced to participate. Bottom line, you can just ignore it. But as you can probably imagine, not everyone on the court saw it that way. Not at all. The dissenting justices had a completely different take. They argued that the majority was missing the single most important part of the story, the context. Yeah, Justice Elena Kagan, who wrote for the four dissenters, she drew a really bright line here. A state legislature, she argued, that's basically a workplace for lawmakers. But a town meeting, that's totally different. That's a forum for ordinary citizens, people who come to interact directly with their government, to ask for things, to protest, to participate. And that difference, she said, changes absolutely everything. And to make this idea of coercion feel really personal, Justice Kagan used this powerful hypothetical. She said, imagine you're at a ceremony that you have to be at, like a naturalization ceremony, and an official gets up and asks everyone to join in a prayer to Jesus. Now, if that's not your faith, do you still feel like an equal citizen in that moment? Or do you feel that subtle pressure to just go along with it, to conform? And this quote, it really gets to the heart of what the dissent was arguing. For Justice Kagan, the core issue isn't some abstract historical debate. It's about the promise of equal citizenship for everyone. The government, she argues, simply cannot take actions that make some citizens feel like insiders and others like outsiders, all based on their faith. And building on that idea, the dissent really zeroed in on the content of the prayers themselves. These weren't just, general, non-denominational, bless us all type prayers. No, they were overwhelmingly and explicitly Christian. And by doing this over and over, the dissent argued, the town of Greece was effectively stamping a Christian identity right onto its government. So what we're left with here are two totally competing visions.
You've got both sides looking at the exact same set of facts, a prayer at a town meeting, and they are coming to completely opposite conclusions about what it all means.
When you boil it all down, the disagreement really came down to three key things: how they interpreted history, how they defined coercion, and what they saw as the prayer's real purpose. On one hand, the majority saw a harmless tradition meant for lawmakers. But on the other hand, the dissent saw a coercive act aimed directly at the citizens in the room. All right, so with the court this deeply divided, how did it all shake out in the end? What was the final verdict? And maybe most importantly, what does it mean for town meetings all across America today? The final vote was, wow, incredibly close. It was 5-4. 5 justices sided with the town and 4 dissented. I mean, this was not some sweeping consensus. This was a decision that came down to a single vote, which just goes to show you how contentious this issue really is. And so, the final verdict came in. It was in favor of the town of Greece. The Supreme Court ruled that the town's practice did not violate the Constitution. They decided that this tradition of legislative prayer could continue, even at a local town meeting. And here's the kicker. Even if the prayers are overwhelmingly from one particular faith, as long as the town isn't actively discriminating against who it invites to give the prayer. And that leaves us with the big question, one that's still being debated in towns and cities all across the country. The court drew its line in the sand, but the cultural and political debate, oh, that is far from over. A case like this really forces all of us to ask a tough question. In a nation that's more religiously diverse than it has ever been, where exactly do we draw the line between respecting tradition and protecting all of our citizens?